Hi everyone, it's T. This video is courtesy of a few viewers here on my YouTube channel who have requested for me to do a demonstration on how to increase the waist measurements in a commercial size pattern. So let's get started. What you would need for this project, I have all the items here laid out and let's just go through them real quickly. For this project, you will need 2 colored markers. I'm going to be using these Sharpies, some tape, a pattern to reference. I'm going to be using this New Look 6150. This is a pattern that I did a week ago, and I did view E. That's the one here featured in the floral print. If you want to learn more about this particular pattern, check out the link above, and I discuss a lot of things about this particular pattern. So check it out. You will also need a piece of white paper. You will also need a ruler or a measuring tape, some pins, your pattern piece. I am using a child size pattern piece so that you can actually see how I'm working, and you can actually be able to see the lines and details. And you're going to need a piece of cardboard. Okay, so let's get started. So before we get into upsizing or grading the pattern, I do want to mention a couple of things here. I do want to talk a little bit about a commercial pattern and things that you should look for on your commercial pattern before you do your grading. So when you get your commercial pattern, you'll notice on the back it has sizes listed on the back. So this top row is referencing American sizes, and this bottom row is referencing European sizes. So I'm grading based on the American size, but we're also going to be referencing the European size as well. So with that said, when you look on the back of your envelope, you're going to see all of these different measurements for the bust, the waist, and the hips. Generally, I like to go with the bust measurements first because it's easier to adjust your waist than it is to just adjust the bust, at least for me anyway. So for the waist, I usually go for the size that's listed on the back of the envelope that corresponds with my bust measurements. So my bust measurements are a 38, and so generally I go within that range. So usually that falls anywhere between a 12 and a 16 on a commercial pattern. So this is a knit pattern, and so that could be why it's listed as a 16 instead, but every pattern is different, so it is something that you should be getting used to, actually looking at the back of a pattern every time you go into a store, and don't just assume that you need a particular size. You're going to always need to look on the back of the envelope because each pattern is different, the designers are different, the companies are different, and how they scale their patterns. So anyway, with all that said, so say I want to reference this 38 here. Another thing that we need to take into consideration is the fact that the finished garment is not the same as this printed measurement on the envelope. The finished garment is generally going to be a size or even 2 sizes, maybe even 3 sizes, well, not sizes, but I would say inches, bigger than the number that you would see on the back of your envelope. So if I were to select this 38-inch bust, then chances are the finished garment measurements with ease will probably be somewhere between a 39 and a 40. Now, if I'm okay with that, having a 39 or a 40 for the finished garment, then I would select this 16. Now, I happen to know, because I did this pattern before, that a 16 is, the finished garment is a 39.5 inch. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that 1.5 inch of ease, okay? But let's say, for the sake of educating ourselves, the 12 or the 14 finished measurements were closer to that 39. Then I would choose this 14, this size 14, because the finished measurements will be closer to what I want in a finished garment. So why am I telling you all of this? I am including all of this into this tutorial because it's important to know your finished measurements. It's also important to know the how much seam allowance that is included into the pattern, as well as any other calculations, such as like if there are darts that are included into the top or the garment, then you need to make sure that all of those things are accounted for, because before you size a pattern, you want to make sure that that final addition that you're making to the pattern is going to benefit you. So, and it's not going to be included into your seam allowance or whatever. So you want to make sure that you look at the finished measurements on your pattern piece. And then also you might have to do some calculations to see exactly how much seam allowance is going to be in that garment, and also how many inches you have to account for darts and things like that, and ease, because you don't want that to be something that is included into your finish upsizing measurements. Okay, so that 39-inch, like I explained here, that 39.5 inch finished measurement, that includes the seam allowance. Okay, so I happen to know for this particular project, I used a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So 5/8 of an inch seam allowance converted to a decimal is 0.625. So if you take that number, that 0.625, and you times that by 4, because you have 4 sides that you're working with on any average top or bodice piece. So you have your front, and you can count that as 2 sides, and then you have your back, which is also 2 sides. So with that said, I know when I multiply 0.625 by 4 that I have, so that equals 2.5 inches for seam allowance. So I know that my seam allowance accounts for 2.5 inches. There are no darts in this particular garment, so I don't have to worry about that. So I don't put any darts in here, so I don't have to worry about that. So I know that included into that finished measurement for this top, that 39.5 inch, is my 2.5 inches of seam allowance. So that has already been taken out. So not included, but it was taken out of that. So I don't have to worry about that. So now if you have a pattern that you're working with that you have to account for those things, you want to make sure that you account for it, so that when you include your final calculations, you're not subtracting from the garment, if that makes any sense. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to take our piece of paper, and we're going to put the paper behind the pattern piece and on top of the cardboard. When we are making adjustments for the waist, we always want to work on the side with the armhole. Okay, so you always do your increases or your deductions on the side of the armhole. So we're going to stick a pin in it right up in this corner. So not on the corner, but between the two sizes here, because we don't want to rip the paper. So we're going to be doing the pivoting method, and we don't want the paper to rip. So we're going to go ahead and stick that pin there. And then we're going to stick a pin in a couple of more spots so that it doesn't move while we're working. So right there is fine. So I'm working with a smaller pattern piece, so I don't need as many pins. You might need more. So the next step, you're going to take your black marker and you're going to put a couple of dashes, so right above the armhole, where the armhole is up here, and then right on the side as well. You're just gonna put a couple of dashes there. So just like you see these dashes here, you're just gonna put a couple of dashes there. Okay? And you want to also mark a couple of dashes down below, so that way when we pivot back, we know where we need to pivot back to, how far we need to go back to. Okay, so next, to increase your size, so let's go back to reference this again. So say you want to go 2 sizes up. So you want to go to a 32. So we know 2 divided by 4 is what? That's 0.5. So we need to add a 1/2 inch to each side of the pattern in order to get 2 inches. So we're going to increase this pattern size a 1/2 inch. And remember, whatever you do to this pattern, you have to do to your front pattern as well. So I'm working with the back. So whatever I do with the back pattern, I have to do to the front pattern in order to get the 2 inches of increase. So I'm going to mark a 1/2 inch here. So that would increase this waist measurement by 1 inch. And then for my front sloper, I will also increase it a 1/2 inch. And that will increase that sloper for 1 inch. And that will be a total of 2 inches. So that will take me up to my size 32. So now remember, I went off of this waist measurement on the back of the envelope, and that's just for the purposes of this tutorial. But when you are doing this project, remember to go off of your finished measurements, because if you go off of this measurement and say on the inside of the envelope it is not a 30 inch, it is a 32 inch, and I mean, then you would not need to increase the measurement. But we need to go off of the finished measurement. So if the finished measurement is a 30 and you don't have another option to go to the next, to increase it to another size because the pattern doesn't offer that option, then you want to go ahead and increase it by that 2 inches from that finished measurement. So remember, don't go by the number on your pattern envelope. Always go by the finished number on your pattern, on your actual pattern piece. And that's usually, you can find that on your front sloper. That's usually where you find that information, on your front sloper. Somewhere near the bottom, it'll have the waist measurements, okay? If you're working with a pattern piece that does not have that information on it, then you just simply measure across from the start of your bodice to the end of your bodice piece, whichever size you're working with, And then, so for this particular bodice, it says 8 inches, okay? So then I know that for both sides of this, for the back and the front, I'm working with 16 inches here, okay? And then you would just subtract out your seam allowance. And then also if you have any darts or anything like that, you would subtract that out because you don't want to include those final calculations into your waist measurement because otherwise it won't be correct. So again, you would subtract out your seam allowance and your darts, and then you would work with that number. And then you would make your additions on that, based on that number. Okay. All right. So this is called the pivoting method. So what you're going to do, you're going to, from the beginning or the end, whichever side you're working with of the pattern, and if you're working with a size in between or a size on the edge or wherever you're working, whichever size you're working with, you're going to start your measuring tape or your ruler at that point. So for the sake of this tutorial, I'm just going to work with this size 6. And so the line for the size 6 is this outer line here. And so from that outer line, I am going to go over 1/2 of an inch. So this will be easier. So I'm going to go ahead and mark where 1/2 of an inch is. So that's where my 1/2 of an inch is. Okay. So after I mark my 1/2 of an inch, I take my pen out, and you want to make sure that the pen in this corner here up by this armhole is secure because you're going to be pivoting and you don't want to rip the paper or you don't want things to get out of place. So you're just going to go ahead and you're going to pivot over to that 1/2 of an inch mark. Okay, so now we're at the 1/2 of an inch mark. So now that I'm at the 1/2 of an inch mark, I am going to take my pen, so not the black one because I don't want, so that's why I have the contrasting colors so that I can tell where my increase is and where I started from. So I'm going to go ahead and mark up from that 1/2 of an inch point and go all the way up the sloper like that. And now I'm going to pivot back over to where I started from, which is where the black lines are, right there. Okay, so this is my increase. So this is 1/2 of an inch. So remember, this 1/2 of an inch increase is actually a 1 inch increase for this sloper. And when I do the increase for the front sloper, that 1/2 of an inch, that'll be another inch, and that'll give me my 2 inches of the 2 inches that I need to get it up to the size 32. So you would do this for any size really. So if you want to go up 34 or 35 or 36, you just have to do the math for that. And again, remember that you have 4 sides, so you have 4 sides that you're working with. So you would divide the number by 4 to get however many inches you need to add to each sloper. So after we have done all that, what we're going to do, we're going to tape this down, and then we're going to go ahead and cut that out because this is going to be our new pattern piece with the increase in size in the waist. So we just go ahead and we take our tape and you just tape that down. So here is the final result. You get something that looks like this. Now you can go on the back and you can, you know, cut as much off as you need, and then you can tape that down and make it all nice and secure. But the main idea here is that with the pivoting method, because this is called the pivoting method, you increase the waist of the sloper, but you are not increasing the armhole or this armhole area, and you don't want to increase this armhole area. So if you want to increase the armhole area, if you have larger arms that you want to compensate for this, that's a whole nother tutorial. So the reason why I like this method is because you can increase the waist without even worrying about increasing the armhole. So everything up here will stay the same. So you don't have to worry about resizing your facing if you have an armhole facing, or resizing your sleeve or anything like that. You're just increasing your waist measurement, and there's a little bit of an increase up here, but that generally doesn't affect anything. It's right here where it's going to affect the most, and that's what you want. You want to be able to increase that waist measurement. So that's it for this tutorial, guys. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you have any more suggestions on what I should do in terms of little tutorials like this one, please leave them in the comment section below. Thank you so much. And for those of you who have requested this video, thank you so much for requesting it. I had fun. I love sharing my knowledge with those people in the sewing community that can have use of it. So thank you so much for that. Thank you for tuning into the channel. And until next time, stay creative.